Ready to explore the cutting edge of digital infrastructure? I'm Carrie Charles, your host of Let's Get Digital. Join me as we dive into the ideas, technologies, and leaders transforming the way we connect, from wireless telecom to fiber networks, data centers, and beyond. Sponsored by Broadstaff in partnership with RCR Wireless News. Now, let's dive in and let's get digital. Welcome to Let's Get Digital. This is Carrie Charles. I'm your host, and I am absolutely thrilled that you are here. You are in for a phenomenal show. I have with me today Wes Cummins. He is the founder and the CEO of Applied Digital. Thank you for coming on the show, Wes.
Carrie, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yes, let's get right into it. I have heard that you have a very interesting and inspiring story. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey and what got you here today.
Yeah, I don't know if I have an inspiring story, but I appreciate you saying that. So, I think, well, some people know, but it's an interesting start to the story because of where it finishes, hopefully not finished yet. But so I grew up in a small town of 200 people in Idaho on a potato farm. And then I always make a joke of, besides working really hard, we worked on the farm, it was still family farm times. But the one thing I learned from working on a farm besides hard work was that I didn't want to be a farmer when I grew up because it is a lot of hard work. So I left, went to college, then I found myself into the investing world. I was a tech investor, been a tech investor for 25 plus years now. And as I've spent a lot of time, mostly in tech hardware, semiconductors, networking, a lot of infrastructure. And then I saw an opportunity come along, which was actually in Bitcoin mining, and it was building data centers for Bitcoin mining back in late 20, started the company in 21, went aggressively into building data centers in the US for Bitcoin miners. And then in 22, we decided to add high performance computing. It was a much different industry at that time in the early part of 22. So we hired some guys that were building actually data centers for Meta at the time, designed a new purpose-built high performance computing facility, much smaller scale. And we started building it in North Dakota at our site in Jamestown, North Dakota. And the idea was we would add small increments of high performance computing alongside our Bitcoin facilities, high power density, high power needs, cooling, which is great for North Dakota. And so we were building 10 megawatts in Jamestown. By December of 22, we were running some GPUs out of our facility in Jamestown. And we had a few customers, mostly universities, that were doing machine learning and deep learning on the GPUs. And then ChatGPT happened. And so ChatGPT didn't really change anything immediately when it happened. It was a great tool to play around with. And, it was novelty in that it went to 1 million users faster than any app, and it just kind of kept going. But then when Nvidia introduced the H100 in March of 23, our world started to change. And then so I was out marketing data center capacity. We'd happened to have built some capacity. It was a pretty good fit for H100, 50 kilowatt rack densities. And then we started getting introduced into frontier model companies, AI labs, and what they wanted was just GPU capacity. They didn't want to deal with data center. So we started offering GPU capacity. By July of that year, we had a little over 1,000 H100 GPUs online. Then we had customers for that. But at that time, because of what I saw in the market, I went back to my data center design team and I said, guys, look, I know I said we were going to do 10 or 15 megawatts at these sites. I think we need to go back to building hundreds of megawatts of capacity. And so we worked through design. We actually worked with Nvidia's data center team, which I think at that point, a lot of people didn't know that really existed. We worked with the Cray unit over at HPE that has a long history in supercomputing. And we designed a facility really around Blackwell. It wasn't called Blackwell when we designed it, but we were looking at the Nvidia roadmap. And so we designed the facility around that. We started building it in 23. Because we just thought NVIDIA is the clear leader here and we want to just map to that. And, that facility it turned on last month. The first capacity turned on last month. The remaining capacity in that building turned on this month. And then we'll have another building following that, another one following that we've contracted all the core weave. And then we have another campus that looks similar to our Ellendale, North Dakota campus, also in North Dakota, that we've contracted to a investment grade hyperscaler. So we target CoreWeave plus the 5 investment grade hyperscalers, which are Microsoft, Amazon, Oracle, Meta, Google. And so it's one of those. We haven't been able to disclose which one of those it is. So we're off and running and we're building at large scale, and there's a lot of work, and we can talk about what went around that. But to bring this full circle is we're doing this in small agricultural based towns, both of them right now in North Dakota. We're looking at other towns. But for me, it's a really personal journey, and interesting for me to be able to bring the absolute leading edge of technology to a town that's similar in size to what I grew up in, right? I mean, Ellendale's 5 times the size of what I grew up in, but it's still a very small town, great people, great community. We work really closely with the community and really try to be instrumental in positive change. And the projects that we're doing are just such a perfect fit for these communities, and that it's a bit of a headache when we're doing the construction part of it, but at the end you bring a few hundred jobs, maybe 300-400 jobs into a location. You don't change the face of the community. You create a massive amount of tax revenue for the community. So now Ellendale, North Dakota becomes the wealthiest school district in the state. The community, things that you don't think of. So you go to these towns, and now all of a sudden they were doing special tax assessments to fix their sewer system, to do their fresh water, fix a road. And now all of a sudden they have a budget that they can fund all of these programs without taxing the residents. Because what you'll find in these small towns is typically property tax is higher than it would be, in a larger city, because you have to provide these same essential services. And then it also has been rewarding in that it has actually allowed people who grew up in Ellendale, North Dakota, left because there was no real job prospect in Ellendale, North Dakota, and they've actually come back to work at our facility and their families there. And it's really interesting to me and rewarding, and how it's kind of went very much full circle. Coming from a small town, we're the people left behind. We're the last ones to get the internet. I think my parents stopped using dial-up internet in like 2018. And they still live there. But so it is a good full circle story.
I am hearing about applied digital everywhere. And in fact, I was at a meeting this morning with entrepreneurs, and it's just a smaller mastermind. And somebody in the meeting said, I just bought the applied digital stock today. And I said, well, that's interesting because I'm interviewing the CEO today. So congratulations on all your success. And are you talking about the Polaris Forge 2? Was that what you were just talking a little bit about?
Polaris Forge 1 is in Ellendale, North Dakota. Polaris Forge 2 is in Harwood, North Dakota. So in Polaris Forge 1 is where we've contracted CoreWeave for 400 megawatts of critical IT load. And in Polaris Forge 2 is where we've contracted the investment grade hyperscaler, building the same designs. Our building design, we put a lot of work into this. We're on our 4th generation of data center design. So we've made a lot of improvements, I would say, both in the scale, the flexibility, the speed at which we can build these now, and the cost at which we can build them, and then efficiency. And the flexibility is key for the future, right? Because I always make a joke that operating in the AI ecosystem is like operating in dog years. And it truly is, and the change is so fast. And so we're building assets that we expect to last for 30 to 50 years. Then we need to try to future-proof those as much as possible. So we give those as much flexibility as we possibly can in these. But yeah, we've made a lot of progress. We started the company 5 years ago, and now, so we still operate 300 megawatts of Bitcoin data centers, but now we have 700 megawatts of critical IT load under construction, 16 billion of contracted revenue between 2 customers over 15 years. So it's been an eventful year. I mean, it's been a lot of work and a lot of stress, but it's been a really good, rewarding year so far. But the year's not finished yet. Let's see how it finishes out and see what else we can do.
That's incredible. And 5 years. What is your signature advantage? How did you do this? Give me a secret.
There's no real secret other than we were early. So, in 2023, I know it was only 2 years ago, but again, dog years, right? And so when I saw what was happening and I saw the demand level, and at that time, the real focus was could you procure H100s from Nvidia, right? There was no ability to procure these. So if you placed orders, you weren't getting delivery for 6+ months. And so everyone was very focused on procuring the GPUs. And me, with my history and background as a hardware investor, I thought to myself that, they're going to fix wafer throughput at TSMC. They're going to fix the CoWoS packaging, the advanced packaging for the semiconductors. They're going to fix bottlenecks in transceiver manufacturing. And so they'll fix all of this, but then what will happen is the GPU supply chain itself will balance out with the demand. But I was looking at the data center space and I'm going, where are we going to put all of these GPUs? And eventually, I think I tweeted about this in the summer of 23. I said data center space is going to be the issue. Eventually, that's going to be the issue. And I thought it might be all the way to 25. It could happen in 24. But there was so little of this high power density data center capacity in the market because the vast majority of data center capacity was built for streaming and all of our video apps and pictures and messaging. And all of those are really CPU based data centers. And they only need, I think the average power density is 7 kilowatts a rack. And then if you want to be efficient with H100, you need to be at 50. And then when we look at Blackwell now where we're deploying, it's at 135 kW a rack. And so the power densities went up. And so now you need different style of cooling because air cooling works to about 50 kW. And then you need liquid cooling after that. And so I was just working through this in my mind and going, how are we going to get power? How are we going to get permits? And how are we going to build and deal with the supply chain? And I'm going, the semiconductor supply chain knows how to ramp up really quickly. How do you deal with all of that? And so we did that early and we started early. And then we went and built a team really early before the demand kind of is what it is. And so we put a great team together and we stubbed our toe in how we did things. So we kind of started with, we're going to retrofit Bitcoin facilities. And then we abandoned that pretty quickly. And then we were going to build a scaled down version. And this was before the ChatGPT had showed up. And so we'd kind of been through iterations. And by the time we went to large scale, we said, look, we have this design. We worked with the leader for GPUs in the industry, the real leader in AI innovation from a hardware perspective. And so we designed to that. And then we went out and secured supply chain around that. And so now we're sitting, I thought, 18 months ago, I was super optimistic securing 600 or 700 megawatts per year of MEP, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing for our supply chain. And now I don't think I was optimistic enough. But we went and secured these so that we can actually build, we can deliver for our customers because there's a lot of news and there's a lot of big contracts, a lot of announcements. And I've been saying lately, it's really fun to make big announcements and signing contracts, but you have to deliver on those contracts. That's the next step. And so we're actually delivering. We turned over the first half of our building on schedule, turned over the second half of our building ahead of schedule, and we're working to really deliver that second building ahead of schedule as well because our customers are really needing the space. So we're trying to pull that ahead, and I think we will pull that ahead. But the key here is, not only signing the contracts, making the design, but actually building and delivering a product on time and for the customer so that our customers could be successful as well. So the real advantage here is we started early. We've made some mistakes. We've ironed a lot of those out, and we have a really streamlined process now for supply chain, for building. We have a lot of power from a site perspective. So we're just in a really good position.
So there's another bottleneck in the data center world, and that is people and workforce. So is that affecting you, or how is that affecting you?
Yeah, so like I said, with our team that manages construction and does design and does operations, we did that early. And so that was great. We have really fantastic people in place for that. And then there's dealing with the local labor that actually builds the facility. And one of the things that we have done, so we've carved out this spot for ourselves in North Dakota. And we looked at North Dakota and said, look, it's abundant power. They're generating 8 to 10 times the amount of energy in the state versus what they use. The former governor, Doug Burgum, who's now Secretary of Interior, one of his biggest agenda items in the state when he was governor was we want to use the power, the energy that the state generates for the economic benefit of the state rather than exporting it. Here we are, right? So we bring that use right into the state. And we started with Bitcoin and now we're doing it with AI data centers. So you have that. You have a cold climate, which is phenomenal. And the cold climate allows us to run at a much higher efficiency. So a PUE, so the power that we use goes mostly to the IT. So we published a white paper back in June because of the location with the abundant low cost energy, because of the weather. We actually can save our customers versus southern states on 100 megawatts, roughly $50 to $65 million per year in operating costs. That's savings to our customers. That's a huge benefit over time. And so we're signing 15-year contracts, so you can just do the math. And even, that's on 100 megawatts, $750 million on the low end that you're saving over that contract length. So big deal there. And then a lot of fiber in the state from a connectivity standpoint, because you have a lot of cross-country routes that run through North Dakota. But here, back to the point of the question, we're creating a data center region there, and we're the only ones doing it. So we have really good handle on the local labor force for building. And even better, we're not competing with 20 other data center sites like we would be if we were operating in Texas or if we were operating in other states that are much bigger data center states. And we're creating the region ourselves. We're creating the data center region in North Dakota. And now we have 2 hyperscalers in North Dakota. I think we'll add more to North Dakota. We'll add some to South Dakota as well and just create that region, but have that labor force that's more captive to Applied Digital instead of us plus an electrician or a plumber can just drive 20 or 30 miles down the road and get a 10% raise. Now, we do spend a lot of time, you'll laugh at this, but we treat the construction people on site really well. I was having a conversation 2 weeks ago with Brad Barton, who leads construction for us, about the catering and curating menus so that the food is really good on site. And so we do these things, and I'm like, but there's a lot of things on my bingo card that I would have never thought that I would be doing, going alongside of building data centers, and curating menus and what the catering looks like on site was one of those things. But we do, we want to be a great place to work when you're on site so that we retain the labor that's there and is already done. If they're doing building 1, we want them for building 2 and building 3 and building 4. So it's just easier to retain that labor. But it is, in a lot of areas, it's a huge issue, huge issue.
Yes, I agree. The, performance drives culture, and obviously everything you're doing is in alignment with that, including feeding the construction people. So tell me a little bit about your culture. And you are scaling fast. What does it look like? And what does leadership look like inside of this, this rapidly scaling environment?
Yeah, so the day I started the company, my number one goal from a culture perspective was I wanted to create a company where people were excited on Sunday night, right? That was number one for me. I want people to be excited on Sunday night, and I want them to, feel like we're making a difference. They get to see their impact inside the company. And we're a small, we've gotten to be much bigger, but we're still, in my view, a small company. We very much try to create an underdog mentality, which is, it's always great to have that. I'm a big sports person. So, I always talk to people like I feel like I'm now the head coach of the football team, right? And so but we have an underdog mentality. And then I would just say that the culture outside of that is we just get stuff done, right? We make it happen. I have a lot of problem solvers inside the org. We've hired just the right people. We've been growing fast, so you don't always hire the right ones. We've had some mistakes there for sure. But we hire the right people that can get the job done, put them in the place, in the seat, and just let them run. And so I try to remove those roadblocks for people to let them do what they do best. And, we hired Todd Gale, who runs data center design for us. That was a huge hire, and he's just been an absolute home run for the company. Brad was at DPR. He was building data centers for hyperscalers. On the construction side, we brought in Laura Latrello, who came to us from Honeywell, was at Lenovo prior to that, is doing operations for us. She's been great. And then my co-founder, Jason, has just really come up to speed, and he's a fast learner. He went to Harvard, so he's a smart guy, but he's been, really instrumental in getting the company to where it is. And there's so many people I can't list, but getting the right people in the right seats and then removing roadblocks from them, and everyone's excited. We're building some of the largest scale projects. We're building the largest scale project in the history of North Dakota for sure, but some of the largest scale projects in the country and in the world. And it just creates a lot of excitement inside the company.
And a lot of excitement throughout the entire country and world. And that's what we're hearing right now. So what do you see in the way of, trends, where the industry's going? What are we underestimating, if anything, about where the space is headed?
So I think one of the biggest kind of pieces of information that I don't think is correct, that I think flows around in the market, is still this thought process around we're going to build some training sites in more remote locations, and then all the inference is going to be built out in population centers like traditional data center. And when we're working with our customers, when we're working directly with the largest frontier models in the world, we're hearing the exact opposite. Our site is a dual use training and inference site. Our next site is also dual use, and we expect them all to be dual use training and inference because we have to drive costs down in the industry. And so I do think there will be some inferencing that's done, like CDN style, content delivery network style in metro areas. But I think a vast majority is going to be in sites like we're building and other people are building, because when you think about efficiency on a site and driving costs down, so what's the most expensive part of this entire ecosystem? It's the hardware itself, right? So the Nvidia GPUs, they could be AMD, but we're mostly Nvidia GPUs, what we focus on. So that's the most expensive part. And so that means you need to get as close to 100% utilization as you possibly can out of those GPUs. So you want them in a location where if they're not being used for training, they can be used for inference. And if they're not being used for inference, they can be used for training. And so you don't want a location where you have, tens of thousands of GPUs sitting around and, the entire country is asleep. And so, the usage goes from 95% down to 5%, and you don't have anything else to do with those. And that's 10 hours out of the day. It drives your cost up way too high. And so we see a lot more sensitivity around cost in the whole ecosystem. And that's just been tech, from the history of tech, is you got to get the costs down over time. It's how, we're sitting with laptops on our desks that are, significantly more powerful than mainframes were at a fraction of the cost. But we're doing the same here. But one of those key steps is you need 100%, as close to 100% utilization as you can get out of these GPUs. And so I think the trend is really for these large scale sites, and they're not going to be built in metro areas. And this is where most of the inferencing is coming from anyways at this point. So that's probably the biggest one, and the trend that I expect to continue is just more and more scale. We're talking with some customers at our sites about, I'm a really optimistic guy. I have to be an optimistic guy to be crazy enough to go build a $1.2 billion building in the middle of nowhere with no customer, right? And even I underestimated the scale as to what we're talking about on single locations. I was thinking a gigawatt is, a massive amount on a single location. We've been having discussions around, 5 to 10 gigawatts on a single site, these are theoretical discussions about what you could do from lowering a cost, the cost of the build and getting everything more efficient. But we're just seeing that kind of demand and that kind of thought process on the types of sites that we're working on.
So, what drives you, Wes? What makes you just jump out of bed in the morning on a Monday morning because you're so excited on Sunday night, right?
So generally, I gave that, for me, it's not quite that, because it's being excited on a Sunday night, because work never really stops on the weekend. You can check my wife on that, she'll confirm. But for me, it's a couple of things. So, it's obviously running the business day to day is, got all of the challenges of problem solving. And what I learned about myself years ago is when I was doing investing, it's why do I like this so much? It's like I like puzzles, right? And so you're just solving a puzzle all the time, and you're doing that with the company as well, whether it be operational, or whether it be construction, or on design, or new customers, right? It's all of these things of trying to put all the pieces together. And so I like that. But it's been exciting on almost all aspects, right? So we're in a place of we're both delivering and winning new contracts. And so like I'm kind of in the best of both worlds right now, where we get to be doing both because the market's just there for it right now. But probably the most excited I get is just thinking through the possibilities of the future. Like I don't have enough time for it these days, but I could do hours of discussion around a lot of the what ifs and the trends and what we have to be ready for in the future. And we think a lot about this, and we try to make sure that, I was talking about future-proofing our data centers. There's so much new technology coming in a physical format, which is, for me, even better versus, just from an excitement perspective versus software. So, there's a lot of problems that we're solving and there's going to be more problems. But, we're spending a lot of time on load balancing on site with batteries, with supercapacitors. We're spending a lot of time on cooling, on power distribution. So I'm spending a fair amount of time on looking at compound semiconductor solutions for power distribution inside of the data center for more efficiency. It's kind of similar of how EVs went from silicon to silicon carbide. I think we'll see something similar in the data center because we need to go from 415 volts up to 800 volt distribution on the next generation. So the new technology, because I've been a technology investor for a long time, that's always probably the most exciting part for me.
So how do you get your information? Do you have time where you just sit and read and subscribe to newsletters and talk to people? I mean, how are you seeing the future?
Just to do a shameless plug here, ChatGPT.
There you go.
But I do ask Chat a lot of things, but I read constantly on, new products that come out. I love listening to the talks or the interviews or panels that engineers sit on that are in the industry, whether it be, specifically data center engineers or the data scientists that are working for some of these frontier model companies. I love listening to the way they're thinking through, solving the future, whether it's with, large language models or with humanoids or whatever it might be. But I love listening to a lot of those interviews because, like reading articles is great, but like hearing from also like very smart people that have digested a lot of information or sitting on the front lines. Like that's one of my favorite places to get information.
So it's 2035. Tell me about Applied Digital.
So 2035, again, reminder, dog years for AI. But for us, when I look out to the future, we're executing and we're in discussions with almost every single hyperscaler and advanced discussions in some cases for new campuses. And when I look out to the future, it was a big breakthrough when we landed CoreWeave, right? That's our first contract. That was a big relief for me. Again, that big risk on that building in Ellendale. And then we have our second one. We're just gaining momentum. And we've been qualified with basically every hyperscaler. I have different conversations now than I did a year ago, where a year ago, if I sat down with a hyperscaler, it would, be 15 or 20 minutes of explaining who we are and what we do. Now we're known, so we just get right down to what, here's what's available and what we can build for you. And then, and then the price talk always shows up. But we have the two campuses. I think we'll get a third and a fourth and a fifth. And if I have 5 of these campuses amongst different customers, they all go to over a gigawatt. So if I'm looking at what can we actually build, and I look through that pipeline through, 2030 or 2031, we could build that out, right? We could build out 5+ gigawatts of capacity for these tenants, and they're all great tenants. A lot of stability, contracted revenue, so we get great visibility. As much as I love, the building with no customer, building with a customer already is a lot more fun, I found. So the, just executing and then continuing on the forward thinking from an infrastructure perspective. And we've already started down the path of power generation and bringing more power to our locations over the next few years. That'll just continue. And so we have kind of our hands in every part of the ecosystem. We stay away from, being in like an actual, language model or doing any data scientists ourselves, but we try to be the best at what we do and as forward looking as we can be. And we're seeing that, really start to pay dividends for us as far as the interactions with current customers, potential customers, and kind of the scale that I think our company can be by 2035. It's just wildly bigger than I thought it could be a year ago. When you're trying to do that breakthrough for just, I want to sell this 100 megawatt building to someone. Now my mindset is just very different. And I really think that we can be the leader in the industry and one of the largest companies, if not the largest in the industry, just given the momentum that we have and what I see on the demand side for us and how good I feel about the team we have in place and the ability to execute on that roadmap, right? It's one thing about just dreaming up a roadmap, but I feel really confident in our ability to actually execute on a really big roadmap like that.
And also, don't forget, Wes, your passion and your purpose. It's inspiring, right? That's going to be a huge driver of where you're going. So thank you so much for coming on the show. This has just been phenomenal. Congratulations on your success. I cannot wait to see where you're going to be in 2035 and beyond.
Thanks, Carrie. I really appreciate you having me.
All right. Take care.
You too.
Thanks for tuning in to Let's Get Digital. This podcast is powered by Broadstaff, a national staffing firm specializing in digital infrastructure talent. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and join me next time as we explore more stories at the intersection of technology, talent, and transformation. Until then, let's get digital.